Before I ask you how you got on the Narnia Lion, Witch, the Wardrobe, I specifically remembered. So I think it came out after Harry Potter, right? Like when the fantasy and Lord of the Rings was
Yes.
yeah. I remember when you told me that about opening the wardrobe, it hit me that I remember watching the teaser, the very first teaser that came out, and I still think it's one of the most amazing teasers because it ends at the wardrobe, right? And like you don't know what's there to expect afterward. I was really pulled in with that, and I thought it was really brilliantly marketed. But just wanted to point that out. Tell me how you got onto the film, the very first one.
I got onto the film through a executive. She's now an executive at Universal. She's the head of visual effects at Universal. Her name's Jennifer Bell. She had worked with the director and the editor back in the days when the director, a man named Andrew Adamson, who came
Shrek.
up through visual
Yeah.
effects and then through animation, they'd worked together at a visual effects facility like years and years and years prior to that. And then Andrew just through sheer, he's a New Zealander and just a wonderful gentleman, and through sheer, just sort of persistence and intelligence and guidance, and again, political savvy, and also vision. I mean, he's a very creative gentleman. And I think through the ranks of the VFX, I think people saw that this was a gifted gentleman. So when he got into the Shrek world and started, sort of overseeing those, I think people recognized here's somebody who's got something. So he went and pitched to Disney, but also Walden Media, who was tied in with the estate of C.S. Lewis, the author
Hmm.
of the original Chronicles of Narnia books. Um, uh, Andrew was able to, basically sell them on this huge budget movie. This was a $175 million movie back in 2004. This was not a cheap movie to make. And I know Disney was very nervous, as I'd worked on several Disney movies up at, to that point, Armageddon, Pearl Harbor, and then
Yeah.
several of the executives were very concerned about the budget on this film, and having a first time director down there shooting this movie. And they're in New Zealand. There wasn't going to be a whole lot of studio oversight, and I don't think they like that. On certain levels, they like to be kind of involved and part of the process. But in Andrew, they had a director who was extremely confident and really, I don't think had any qualms or any concerns about how this was going to come off. And they started off putting it together like a an animated feature on certain levels. They built what they call a story reel, which is built with a collection of storyboards that you sort of dissolve from one to the other. And
Hmm.
then in certain cases, they had a whole previs team creating entire sequences, because some of the more complicated sequences were hard to board, would have been really complicated to storyboard. And previs was happening then, but it wasn't as pervasive as it is now, and as sort of widespread as it is now. I mean, now previs there's entire companies that's all they do. We had an entire unit that was in New Zealand and had been working up in Burbank, where they had a DreamWorks office working on the film, um, and they were putting it together, for probably a good year before the shoot started. So they had a good blueprint for the film. What they didn't have was a an editor who had a lot of live action and in my case visual effects experience. And I had been a visual effects editor for years, and before starting to get into like feature film cutting. So um, I think they wanted I have to sort of step back for a second and tell you that I was actually the second editor on Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The lead
Hmm.
editor was Sim Evan Jones, who had worked with Andrew, the director, on multiple Shrek movies and stuff, and they had gone back for years. So when I came on, that was my role, was to basically be the guy who had done some live action stuff, but mainly was bringing like a visual effects editor, knack to the process as well. Um, the my friend, she was our visual effects producer on Van Helsing, the film I was on when I got the call. Went in and met both of them, and they recognized my enthusiasm for one, working with them. I was a big fan of the Shrek franchise, but also just the idea that we could move down to New Zealand for for months and work remotely like that, or work, that far away for a while. I honeymooned in New Zealand, so I was very familiar with the country, and I just, fell in love with it on my honeymoon. So for me, it just was a wonderful opportunity. So I kind of begged to join them on the film and said, look, I will take on whatever role you needed. And they were convinced. They brought me on. But then here's what happened, Jawad, is kind of interesting. I went down there kind of not fully knowing what my role was going to be, but shortly after we started shooting the first unit, they added a second unit. And I got to tell you that the shooting schedule on the film was 172 days or something. That's for first unit. So second unit was essentially coming on a few weeks after that, maybe 6, 7 weeks after that, and was shooting concurrently the same amount of footage. It was all shot on film, so you can imagine how much footage was
Wow.
coming through. And at one point, I think Sim, the lead editor, recognized, yeah, Jim, let's just you and I just do the movie. Let's just make this happen. And obviously, a great uh, boon to me to be able to, like, and a great honor to have him kind of like take me on as his co-editor. And the what we realized was, again, that we started off early on just both taking swipes at some of these scenes, like the scene where the family gets on the train early on, the train in London. And they have an awkward moment with some of the other kids in the train car and stuff. And Sim and I both took a pass at that, and then we ended up showing that to the director. And at one point, Andrew, the director, turned and said, "Look, guys, I can't do this for every scene. I can't have like a bake-off between each of the scenes." And he was right, and it didn't make sense. And so again, Sim, thought, "Well, I'll tell you what, let's checkerboard it." And that way, rather than having to sort of edit to keep up the camera all the time, if you need a few days to work on a scene, which in some cases, some of these scenes needed a lot of TLC, we were able to take the time to do that and not so much worry about keeping up the camera because there were two of us. You know what I mean? So the checkerboarding of the scenes ended up being a really wonderful way of doing it. For example, Sim had a scene. We were probably 2/3 of the way through the production, and Sim took on this scene that just ended up being extremely involved. The scene where Aslan gets sacrificed at the altar, and there's just
Mm.
a bunch of coverage and a bunch of coverage of all the characters sort of chanting and rooting for Aslan to get sacrificed, and the queen eventually, picks up the sword and does her business. But the scene was extremely complicated. Again, tons of cameras shooting over the course of, I don't know, a week of just footage pouring in. And for Sim to have tried to, like, just sort of, throw that together was not going to happen. He needed time to work on it. Um, and so there were smaller scenes coming from second unit, smaller beats coming from second unit, and I was able to sort of pick those up and let Sim do his thing and really focus on the scene, like focus on it, like get married to it for a week. And you can see it in the final film how effective that scene is, but it's largely because he had time to work on it like that, while we were shooting. Um, so again, I think the role kind of evolved over the first few weeks when I came on, and we were still trying to figure out what it was going to be. And then once we all settled into kind of this, like I said, checkerboarding of the various scenes, then we kind of moved into the place where I was accepted as a co-editor on the film, and we didn't look back there. And like other people you've talked to, other editors you've talked to, Chris, Billy, Joel, these guys can all point to one or two films in their career that was a bit of a turning point for them, a seminal part of their career. And I would say The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for me was that turning point, because I was, I'd worked in that capacity. I'd cut feature films myself, but they're all much smaller. And this, this film ended up being not just a tremendous responsibility and tremendous sort of opportunity, but then the response to it was pretty phenomenal. The film ended up being a huge hit, and it just it's funny when you get one of those on your resume, how your career changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always about that one project that turns the
Yep.
tables.
Yep.
Amazing.